Hello again, chess enthusiasts. We have arrived at position number 9 in our Soviet series, and this is the greatest number of moves required to deliver checkmate so far, and will prove to be the greatest. It's a checkmate in 10 moves by white against black. What I immediately noticed, and something that may occur to anyone looking at this, is that the preponderance of material is with the second player in this position. Meaning to say that if you tot up the value of all the pieces and pawns, white has 15 points compared to black's 23. So you would think that the preponderance of material would enable black to win, and quite possibly if black's king weren't in the position that it finds itself, then that would be the case. But again, looking at this position, the black king, at the moment at least, cannot move. And there are several other elements in this that cannot move, like the 3 pawns, the black pawn on b4, black pawn on e3, and finally the black pawn on h5. Now the pawn on g3 can move. What we have to do in this position, and my advice to anyone trying to solve especially this sort of a problem, because of the greater number of moves required, it does give the second player more variations, or at least in theory. But in practice, if you can find the key move, this is the element, of course, if you can find the key move, and intuitively, I'm often able to find the key move, but even then I have doubts, because as you move along and you start to analyze these positions, it's less clear that you have it right. You know, there are possibilities for the opponent to escape, either with a king disappearing somewhere or an interposition or something like that. And that proved to be no exception in this case. I looked at it time and again, and I did have doubts. It's like the correspondence player who, even a very strong correspondence player, can think for several days over a move and still be uncertain about it. And I am no exception to that as well. I am in doubt a lot of the time, but it's that doubt that enables you eventually to get it right. You're not complacent, you're not overly confident or cocky about it. So the thing to look to here is, if you can find the key move, the key elements in place then after that will be to find forcing moves. Now, if you can find forcing moves, in other words, where the opponent has no choice but to play his first move the way that you want him to play it, the second move the way that you want him to play it. In a way, it's like playing a waiting move and coaxing the opponent to play in a way that perhaps he wouldn't have if you hadn't played the waiting move. And this particular problem does require you to find the key move, of course, as they all do, and then a succession of forcing moves, so that you're more or less looking at one main line. And of course, the setters of these problems, when they wanted you to submit the answers, they did indeed, as I'll prove to you here. Just move up to this moment. Let me just look at this. Right, and it says here, the committee for the chess composition requests the participants to present the solutions in a proper form. Give the key in the 2 movers, the key threat and white's second moves to counter all of black's against threats in the 3 move problems, and the main variation is to be indicated in the multiple movers. So this is certainly one of the multiple movers. As we just move back to number 9 for a moment, a checkmate in 10 moves, that would definitely meet the criteria for a multiple mover. So as indicated, they want the main variation. So they're giving you a clue there, although of course, in order to satisfy that it is the main variation, often you need to, as I have done in a lot of these, I've gone about looking at all the possible lines of reply, and that is the way you have to eliminate everything from it. And so what we need to do here is to find the key move. Just take a look at it and see if you can find what you would regard as a key move. Just consider that the black king is hemmed in, and you want to keep him that way. And you want to force him to make a certain move in order to save the game. This is the point. Although it's a checkmate in 10 moves, you can force him on his very first move to have to consider his position that he might not have that number of moves unless he finds the right reply. So just take a good look at it. Like I say, this king area on f4, he can't move. White's rook on the 5th rank controls that rank. e4 is covered by the white bishop on g6. The g4 square is covered by the king, which also covers the white pawn on g5. And then finally, the square f3 is covered by the white pawn on e2. And if you notice, even if black could move that g pawn to g2, it still wouldn't provide black with a flight square because the king on h4 covers that square on g3. So black is well and truly hemmed in, although he does have some nuisance pieces there if you think about it. He has that bishop controlling the h1 to a8 diagonal. It also is homing in on the e4 square. But that pawn is worth looking at on e3. Now, white's bishop on g1 is concentrating on that black pawn on e3. So I'd give you a clue here. The e3 square is worthy of consideration. Just pause the video once again. Don't hesitate to do that. Take your time and find the right reply, or find the right key move, which will require the right reply. And I can tell you now, once you find the key move, there is only one reply by black that will save him being checkmated in 2 moves. So just take a good look at it. That is the position. Like I've already said, and I'll repeat it, black is well up in material. But this is one of those situations where clearly, if this were a practical game, you'd say, well, white has sacrificed a lot of material to reach this position, having seen the fact that he can checkmate in so many moves. I remember a game that I studied some years ago. It was Wilhelm Steinitz against Karl von Bardeleben at Hastings 1895, where we reached a position where Steinitz had done just what I've said, and he announced checkmate, I think in about 10 moves. It might have been 11 or 12, but I believe it had reached double figures anyway, and he proceeded to demonstrate it. It is a very instructive game, and that is one worthy of anyone studying. And I have seen it online, so it is available, and it's worth having a look at. So, having looked at that, let's just move over to here. We have exactly the same position. Now, concentrating on the king needing to be kept in check, meaning to say kept under control, not actually in chess check for the moment. What I would also say before I show you the key move here is that when white eventually delivers checkmate, it is in a way that you would not expect, and by a chess man that you would not expect as well. And I was the most surprised man when I finally found it. And this is the reason why it took me so long, because I was expecting to check with a totally different piece in a different way. And so that clue might be of assistance. I know it's 10 moves down the track and perhaps a little way off, but this is a very good one for calculating in practical play, because often you can have a forced win in what would seem like a good many moves. I mean, let's face it, if this game has already gone 40 moves and another 10 moves would make it 50, you'd have 25% of the moves at this stage that are required to finish the game. So it's not an inconsiderable number of moves. So you do have to think about that one as well. So again, it is a rook move. So there's the clue. And what I've also given you in clues is that you want to keep the king enmeshed in that position. He can't get out of it. He can't move anywhere still. You don't want to let him move. Don't relinquish your grip at all on e4 with such as this bishop here or anywhere along here. In other words, don't move this rook off the 5th rank. That is keeping him in play. I know at the moment, even without the rook, he still wouldn't be able to move here or here because of the bishop and the pawn, but don't take that rook off the 5th rank. It is absolutely required. So I'll deliver the key move. It is rook to e5. Now that rook is not attacked in any way, cannot be taken. Now, what is black's only move here? Well, I know that we've talked about interposing pieces, and that is more than an acceptable way of dealing with so many threats. But like I was saying before, this e pawn is under threat. So what is white's immediate threat against this? In other words, what would you say white can do to that pawn? Clearly, if he takes it with his rook, it's going against what I've just said, leaving the rook on the fifth, and the rook doesn't deliver checkmate. How does white deliver checkmate there on his next move? Well, quite simply, just by taking this pawn off here. I think you'll agree that that is checkmate. That's why that pawn on e3 needs a lot of attention. And the more attention you give it, the more you'll find the forcing moves. So that cannot be allowed. So how do we parry that threat? Well, I did mention interposing. Of course, this bishop can come in here. And that certainly stops bishop e3, because then the king could take it. And then it could escape down here and possibly even queen the pawn, which you certainly wouldn't want. So I think the simple answer there is, this is going against my earlier rule, but I think we'll make an exception here, given that we're administering checkmate. And I think you'll agree that is indeed checkmate, because the rook is covered by the bishop covers the square, the pawn is covered by the king, the square is covered by the white king, this is blocked with his own pawn, and the square is covered by the pawn, so that would be checkmate. So clearly, interposing the bishop, although in many instances an interposition would be the right move, not in this particular case. So the bishop goes back to b7. What is the forced move here? And this is what I'm saying. Once you find the key move, and rook e5 is the key move, how do you force black? What is the only move to stop bishop e3 mate? Clearly, if this pawn weren't here, you could move this bishop to here, and that would stop it at that point. But you can't do that, because the pawn is in the way, so bishop e3 mate. You can't move the king anywhere, and you can't utilize any of these other pieces. Can't utilize any of these, and we've demonstrated that the bishop doesn't work, and these pawns don't move. So what is the only piece that remains? It's the rook on c8, isn't it? So where do you put that rook on c8 to stop bishop e3 mate? Well, the only move is to play rook c3, and that does stop bishop e3. So you force black with your key move to play rook c3. There's nothing else, otherwise it's mate in 2. So how does black look at this? Does he think that he's stopped the threats? Well, of course he hasn't. It's a mate in 10, isn't it? So how does white approach this? Now this motif has been gone through in other videos. One is video number 6, the revisitation of number 6. It also appears in number 7. I think it appears in another as well. It's where a piece is needed somewhere else on the board. It swings from one side of the board to the other. I'll give you a clue, it's a bishop. So I think that rules this one out, because it's locked in. So it must be this one. Now, moving down here or here wouldn't be the answer. So by process of elimination, it is this white bishop to which square down to here. I did just say it needs to swing from one side of the board to the other. It's not completely from one side to the other, but it's near enough to it. Well, it's this move, bishop b1. this is yet another forcing move. It's a waiting move. It's not really doing anything, but it's doing a tremendous amount. No, it's not enabling us to keep our focus on e3. So we're shifting our attention here. This is a theme that appears in a lot of these problems, Soviet or otherwise, where you make a move where you're wanting the second player to do something that ordinarily he wouldn't do. You're switching his attention by moving the attention over to somewhere else. Now he's looking at this and he's thinking, well, he can't make me on e3. Can he make me anywhere else? Well, he can, yes. Can you see it? Just give you a second or two. Well, the threat, of course, is rook to f5. That wouldn't have been possible with the bishop down here because I'll just put it back for a moment to demonstrate. And this explains why it wouldn't have been possible on the first move, because if you did play rook f5 instead of rook e5, he just comes here and he has a flight square. And now, of course, he's threatening to take this pawn. And of course, if you come back to the starting point, then he can go back to the starting point, and we're getting nowhere fast. So the idea of playing rook e5 to coax this rook over here, then we bring the bishop down here. Now we are threatening rook e5 because the bishop's on the other side of the rook and it is controlling d4. So we've switched our attention really from e3 to f5 and d4. So that is checkmate. Of course, there is a defense to it, and we need to find that defense. Can you see what it is? It's a forced move. There is only one move on there that will stop rook f5. Well, clearly, this knight won't stop rook f5 because if it goes here, you just deliver checkmate. This bishop's on the wrong color. This rook can't stop it. So by implication, this bishop, which didn't work when it interposed, is needed. Where does it go? Well, it could go here. What happens if it does? Well, you just take it. And black is in check. He's not in checkmate just yet. He has one move. It's here. But then we go back. This is a theme in a lot of these problems, particularly in this one, the back and the forth. It's almost as though you're repeating position, but you're not exactly. You have to be careful that you don't threefold repetition, because then that would be a draw. But as can be seen here, the king is in check, the pawn covers f6, the bishop is still doing its job beyond the king, the rook covers here, but the king can go here. We mustn't forget that. And then we deliver checkmate. That is definitely checkmate. And that's in well under the 10 moves. I haven't counted them, but I would say about 6 moves for that. And that is checkmate. The rook is covered, the bishop covers the square, the pawn covers the square, the king covers the square here, and it covers the pawn. So that is definitely checkmate. And no one could argue against that. Just take a good look at it. Yeah, that's fine. So that doesn't work. But it is that bishop that moves. The question is, where does it go to stop rook f5 mate? So just to put the position back as it was originally, to make sure that we get this absolutely correct. I was one move ahead of myself there, so we'll make sure that we don't make any slips in this. We'll just make sure that that is the original position. As I keep reiterating, you do have to be so careful here. It is that easy to go wrong, and we don't want to go wrong. Yeah, that's the position. So white played rook e5. he forced black to play rook c3, and then we draw the bishop right down to b1. Needless to say, this rook can't afford to move away from here, otherwise it would be bishop e3 mate. And in any event, even if it took this pawn, stopping bishop e3, you'd have rook f5. So you have to do something to stop the rook going to f5. Well, the move in question is bishop c8. So the bishop relinquishes its control over h1 to a8 and does in fact control f5. The rook is still doing its job here, preventing bishop e3. So that's after rook e5, rook c3, bishop b1, bishop c8. So what comes next? It is a forcing move. Whatever white plays here, black must reply with one and only one move. A clue is it's a rook move. Now, this is going against what I said earlier. You must not move the rook off the fifth. You have to, though, at this stage. It was important before, but now that the bishop has gone to b1, it's more important to play the next move. The next move is the only move that will secure you a checkmate in 10 moves. Can you see it? Well, it's a checking move. Now, clearly it wouldn't make much sense to check on there, because you just take the rook and it will be all over. So by process of elimination, it's rook e4 check. That's the third move. Now the king there has to reply in one and only one way. All the other squares are covered, so it has to go to f5. That's a forced move. So far, black has played three what are effectively forced moves. This is the point that I was making at the beginning of this video. So what does white play now? I mean, going back to e5, then the king would go back to f4. That wouldn't achieve anything. And he can't play to f4 because the king would just take the rook. Just note for a moment that when this rook moves, it will be delivering a discovered check. Just keep that one in mind. At the moment, of course, the black king has a flight square. And if he's allowed to get to that flight square, he'd be away and there'd be no mate in 10. So just keep that in mind, that this is the position after 3 king f5. Okay, you've had a chance to think about it. You take this pawn. You reconcentrate on e3. You take that pawn, discovering the check. Now this check covers the king and beyond. This pawn is covering here. This rook is covering the e line. It's more important now to have the rook on the e line than it is on the fifth. So, where does black go from there? Where can he go? He can interpose the rook, of course. And what would you do? Well, you take the rook. Don't forget this rook is needed for e3. So where does the king go then? Well, it would have to go back to here, wouldn't it? And where do you go then? Well, what you play then is to here. And you're checking him. These are covered. That's covered. That's covered. And the rook's covered. So that would be checkmate. So it wouldn't be a good idea to take the rook and put it in between. So we'll just do that for a moment. We'll put our rook back on c3. It is needed on c3. So we've played rook e5, rook c3, bishop b1, bishop c8, rook e4 check, king f5, rook e3 check. So by process of elimination, since it wouldn't do any good at all interposing this rook between the bishop on b1 checking the king on f5, the king must move. And the only square that it can move is king f4, so it's gone back. You see what I mean about moving back and forth here, but you're not repeating moves. It's not in any way a possibility for black to obtain a draw by threefold repetition, because white has moved the rook and he's moved the rook again, but then he's taken the pawn, which is totally different. So he's restarted the position on the repetition. So what does white do here? Does he take the rook? Well, clearly, if he did take the rook in that position, he would be threatening. You have to make sure that all the squares are covered, and they are. The rook's covered by the bishop. This bishop covers down here. The pawn covers here. Bishop covers here. King does the rest. So that would be made. The only problem is, though, is that black then would do that. And then if white were to play bishop e3, the king could just whip it off. There's no longer any protection from the rook. You need the rook and the bishop working together to inflict bishop e3 mate. So that really wouldn't be of any use whatsoever. So leave the rook. It's not tempting in any way at all. So we've taken the pawn off. We need to put the rook back on c3. There you go, rook. So that is the position after king f4. What comes next? Well, you repeat the moves. You play rook e4 check. And it's covered by the bishop. Covering here, that's covered. So it's just this square that's available yet again to the king. So he has to play it. There's no way around it. So he plays it, king f5. It looks as though really you're not getting anywhere here, and this is what caused me the confusion. So what does white play now? Again, remembering that black has this potential flight square. So really he has no option at that stage but to repeat here. Rook e5. Check. That rook is not attacked by anything. So that's 6, rook e5 check. So the king has no option but to backtrack. He has to go to king. It's a back and forth situation. 6, king f4. So what does white play here? This is the tricky part of it. And to give you a clue, I did mention pieces moving from one side of the board to the other. Apparently inconsequential moves, apparently time-wasting moves, but we are playing for time here. This is going to be the longest of my videos. I can see that now. I'm looking at the clock and we're already nearly at 29 minutes. I'm sorry about that, but this is a mate in 10 and you can't go through this in split second. Well, in fact, the move is you put the bishop back. This time it does go back to its original square in this problem. So you play 7 bishop g6. And what are you threatening here? Well, quite simply, you're threatening to deliver mate on e4 because this bishop is no longer on b7. Many would say, oh well, couldn't he play his rook here to stop rook e4? He could, but unfortunately then bishop e3 would be mate because the rook covers the bishop and all the other squares are covered. So the rook again wouldn't do any good sort of interposing there to stop the mate. So what is the forced move? Again, these pieces here can in no way do anything the dark squared bishop. It's the light square that we're threatening. So that bishop would be no good. The knight wouldn't cover the light square. The rook couldn't get there in time. What happens? White has just played 7 bishop g6. Okay, many would say, well, you could play bishop f5. That would stop rook e4. What happens then? Well, the bishop is taken off with check. Now black is losing a lot of his pieces here if you think about it. They're going, aren't they? The pawn's gone, the bishop's gone. Where does the king go? It can't go to e3 or f3. So it can't touch the rook or around here, so it must go to e4. So that's rook f5, that's bishop f5, rook f5, king e4. What comes next? Well, again, we're repeating moves and we're double checking here. Now this is worth noting here. This pawn ordinarily will be available for capture, but you notice with taking the pawn on e3, we've unblocked the bishop so that it covers the pawn. That's the beauty of taking on e3. Well, everything's the beauty of taking on e3, but this really saves white's bacon here, and the pawn covers the rook. So rook e5 check. What's next? Well, he's only one move. He has to go here. And then rook e4 mate, which is what I was talking about before. And that is indeed checkmate. So, just to get back to the original position for a moment, and we'll make sure that we get this one right. So there's only one other move that can be played here. Let me just make sure that I have the correct position here. It looks all right. Yeah. So just to repeat the moves, rook e5, rook c3, that's 1. Bishop b1, bishop c8, that's 2, rook e4 check, king f5, that's 3, rook e3 check, king f4, that's 4, rook e4 check, king f5, that's 5, rook e5 double check, king f4, that's 6, bishop g6, white's 7th move. Well, the only possible move to prevent rook e4 mate is for black to go back to b7. The original square. We have a lot of this here. We've demonstrated that bishop f5 doesn't work, so it is that. How does white play his 8th move? Remember the repetition process here. It doesn't really look as though he can do it, but he can. Okay, well, it's rook f5 because now the bishop is no longer here. It's here. So play rook f5. Where does the king go? It has 1 square. So, since the rook's not being attacked, the king must move to e4. That's 8 moves. Can white checkmate in 2 more moves? Well, of course, going to f4 wouldn't work because the king would come to here and then escape. This is why, like I keep saying, you do have to be mindful that you don't allow the king an opportunity to get away. So that's after 8, rook f5 check, king e4. And I did say that you mustn't move away from the fifth with the rook. Well, that rule can now be broken because on white's ninth move, he does move the rook, and it's not on the fifth rank. It's not anywhere along here, and it's not back this way. So where would he go? Well, he's wanting to control the sixth rank. Like I just mentioned, if the king can get to here, it could then escape here. So the move here is rook f6. Discovered check. And he's controlling the sixth. Now the king can't move d3 or e3 because of the bishop, or to f3. The pawn covers d3 and f3. He can't go anywhere here because of the rook. He can't touch this pawn because of the bishop. And he can't go to e5 because of the pawn. So again, you're forcing black to play his only move, which is king d5. Now, how does white mate on the next move? I did say it's an unusual finish to this. Can you see it? Well, clearly that wouldn't work because you can just take the bishop off. It's not protected by anything. But e4 is the square. So what can go on e4 to deliver checkmate? The rook can't. This bishop's the wrong color, and I've just demonstrated that. So by process of elimination, we now advance this pawn, which at the start of this game looked improbable with the black pawn being there, but we've laid the foundations to deliver checkmate with e4, and that is checkmate. Again, this pawn now covered because the pawn's gone. This pawn covers this square. These pawns are covering all these squares, and the rook covers the sixth, and the bishop covers the pawn. Isn't that a wonderful checkmate? And there is absolutely no doubt about that, that is the correct solution. And white has made forcing moves every step of the way. And the back and forth sequence, the bishop from one side of the board to the other. I take my hat off to the people who composed this, and what it shows is, although perhaps many would take a dim view of the Soviet Union in so many respects, we won't go into that, it's not appropriate here. What I will say is that especially the Soviet school of chess, and in particular the Botvinnik school of chess, that brought on such players as Karpov and Kasparov, and Fischer had the greatest admiration for it. He didn't have the greatest admiration for the Soviet system, the way that it played him against all of its players over the years, and resulted in him being disadvantaged in so many ways. Again, we won't go into that, but what we will say is that he did have admiration for the way that the training school was put into place, and bemoaned the fact that there was nothing in America comparable to it, and he was quite right. But that is a wonderful checkmate, and we've just reached 38 minutes on this, so I'll wrap things up at that and trust that you enjoyed it. We have a draw coming up in problem number 10, which is a very interesting one, a bit more difficult because you need to look at it in a totally different way than either forcing checkmate or one side or the other playing to win. We'll come back to that one, and thank you very much indeed for watching, and goodbye for now.